guys, welcome back to another edition of Raw Intuition Inside Scoop. Today's guest is someone that I have been meaning to have on the channel for many years, and now we're finally making it happen, and for good reason, because she has just published her brand new book, Heal and Prevent Autism: Natural Solutions That Work. There it is. And I believe this is going to be a game-changing book. It just came out last week, I believe. You can get it on Amazon, and I believe on Karen's website as well. But it is laid out beautifully. It covers so much terrific information that a lot of people aren't talking about. And so I think it's really important that we talk about this issue and we talk about Karen's book here. Because I think everybody's going to want to get a copy of this and read it from front to back. So today's guest is Karen Ranzi, one of my most inspirational people in the Raw movement. Karen is an internationally acclaimed speaker, an award-winning author, and a raw food lifestyle coach. She's been a leading expert in the field of nutrition and child development for over 2 decades. In 2010, Karen published her book, Creating Healthy Children Through Attachment Parenting and Raw Foods, which is another great book that I recommend people pick up. So a lot to talk about, and I'm super excited to have Karen here with us. So Karen, thank you so much for giving us some of your time.
Thank you so much for having me here, Matt. I'm happy to be here, and I'm always passionate about this topic of raw food and raising healthy families and just getting people on track with a healthier lifestyle, which couldn't be more important than it is today.
Definitely. Yeah. Today, more than any time that I can think of, it is so important that people get their health right. And I think reading your 2 books are a great way to start learning how to do that. So before we get into your book, your new book here, can you give us just a little bit of an idea of what your lifestyle was like growing up, and kind of how you got introduced to the raw food lifestyle, and just kind of what that transition looked like?
So beginning when I was growing up, I was raised on a standard American diet. My mother did not believe that my sister and I could just grow up on plant foods. However, I was fortunate that I had a father and a grandmother who were living basically a raw food lifestyle. And my grandmother, my paternal grandmother, in 1921, she had asthma and emphysema. She was hospitalized, and the doctors, they gave her whatever drugs they had at that time. She got worse. They told her they couldn't help her anymore and that she should get everything in place because they did not expect her to live more than another few months. And my grandmother was petrified because, many people, even when they're really sick, are not willing to change their diet.
Yeah.
But my grandmother was a single parent, and my father was only 4 years old. And she was really driven to do something. And somebody brought her the book. I believe it was a relative, brought her the book, a book while she was in the hospital, called The Mucusless Diet Healing System by Arnold Ehret, a German professor. And she read that book cover to cover, and she was just shocked. And, during that time, 1921, I mean, when you think about it, they didn't have genetically modified foods. They didn't have pesticides. They didn't have processing. So why was she so sick?
Right.
Well, she was so sick because her diet was predominantly animal food. She wasn't getting the fiber that she needed. When she read the Mucusless Diet book and she started making the changes, right away she started seeing benefits for her digestion. And so she said, I have nothing to lose. I'm going to do this. And she continued, and she completely healed in under a year. the doctors were amazed. She went on to live another 50 years.
Wow.
And I grew up with this healing story because she was living with us periodically. And, but my mother didn't want to change her diet, and she was scared because of what the doctors were telling her about raising my sister and I on a plant way of eating. And so I grew up on white bread, hamburgers, macaroni and cheese. My favorite food growing up was cheddar cheese. And by the time I was a teenager, or even a little younger in my adolescence, I started having severe cystic acne, like cysts on my face and on my back. And for like the next 25 to 30 years, I was running to dermatologists, using very dangerous drugs. One called Accutane, which is very popular.
Yep.
It totally dried out my skin, but it didn't get rid of the cystic acne. And it also caused a lot of side effects, really dangerous side effects. It affected my eyes. So I had a lot of problems that came from these medications. I was taking other meds as well. And that led also to problems with my menstrual cycle. Like I would have my period like once a year, once every other year. And when it did come, it was super painful. I was like in bed, I couldn't get out of bed. I had a really heavy flow. I was loaded with pain, cramps, and had to take off work. So I know what can happen when your diet and your lifestyle are not healthy and imbalanced, and your hormones are all over the place. And it was showing up in my skin. It was showing up in my whole system was out of whack. And that's why I was having this premenstrual syndrome. I also had IBS, irritable bowel syndrome. I was constipated. I was, really a mess. And that was from, early childhood, actually, because even in my earlier years, I was always on maintenance antibiotics. For one thing or the other. I was always getting sick between the ear infections and the strep throat. I'm sorry, but those are not normal childhood illnesses.
Right.
It's been told to us a lot of times that, oh, ear infections, throat infections, kids get those. I would get the flu every year and be on drugs. And, my mother, she meant well, but her way of healing me was giving me scrambled eggs and toast. And the toast would be like very dark and loaded with butter and lots of scrambled eggs. And that was healthy to her. And so instead of having a flu for a very short period of time, I had the flu for a month. And so that's how I grew up. And it was really hard on the marriage between my parents because my father thought differently. And when I asked him about my skin, he said it all has to do with what you're putting in your mouth. But I didn't listen because I was addicted at that point already to the foods that I had grown up on. And I didn't want to give up my dairy. But I did become a vegetarian at age 17. And that's because I started watching my father and my grandmother in my years growing up, taking out every little insect in a tissue. And I loved that.
Yeah.
I was like, why isn't my mother doing that? Like she had the fly swatter and she was killing everything. And so I saw two different ways of interacting with the creatures around us. And I fell in love with this way of respect, which my father always said was called ahimsa.
Right.
And it's this sacred connection with other creatures. So at age 17, for moral and ethical reasons, I became a vegetarian. But at that time, I didn't realize how harmful it was to be eating dairy and eggs. Not only harmful for me, but extremely cruel to be taking dairy in from animals that are, I had no idea about the dairy industry, how animals are chained up, how cows are constantly impregnated. I had no idea.
Most of us
And I
don't.
recently did a video with my husband who went vegan years later, even after marrying me, and after me telling him how harmful dairy is to the life of the cow, he still didn't really believe that. And it was only just recently, I did a video with him on my YouTube channel at Feel Fabulous with Food about why he became vegan. And that was the reason, because he finally understood what was really happening. He started doing some of his own research. It wasn't enough for him just to believe his wife and her research.
Right.
He wanted to do further. And when he did, he realized that it was wrong to eat dairy and eggs as well. And even if you're getting organic, I mean, you're getting way too much protein. It's a fallacy that we need all that protein. You're getting way too much. And it's very difficult to digest protein. Dairy and eggs and all animal food put a tremendous amount of stress on the liver and the kidneys. And they actually cause 70% of the calcium to be washed out. And this is research. I mean, this is being looked at, how we digest food. Animal food has no fiber in it, 0 fiber. We need fiber for good digestion. People get constipated because they don't have fiber. Fiber is acting like a vacuum in the system, and it's constantly cleansing. So it wasn't until years later that I realized that health connection, and also the moral connection with what happens in the dairy and egg industry, which is, it's just abominable. It's just awful.
Yeah.
So I did give up the dairy and the eggs in 1989. And so I've been a vegan now for 32 years. And then some years later, much less years than it took me to go from vegetarian to vegan, went to raw food relatively soon after, several years after. So in 1994, I went to raw vegan, and that's because my son, I still had some cystic acne, even though my acne was largely cleared after giving up dairy in 1989 when I went vegan. But because I was still eating a lot of processed junk food as a vegan, I still had scarring that didn't go away. And in 1994, when I went raw vegan, that's when my digestion, because over out with IBS, later candida and leaky gut and all the things that come with poor digestion, still had them as a vegan. And in 1994, when I went raw vegan, even though I made a lot of mistakes at the beginning going raw vegan, it was still miles ahead of what I was eating in terms of processed food. And giving that up, the scarring went away. I no longer had those painful periods. My hormones started getting balanced, and you could see it with my whole system. The fact that my skin completely cleared, that my hair, I was losing clumps of hair. Even my kids are saying, Mom, like, did you know you have bald patches? Like, I had no idea that that they were noticing.
Wow.
And my hair came back, and my digestion totally improved. And so that now was 27 years ago, back in 1994. And even though I made initial mistakes and did listen to a lot of misinformation that you want to be really careful about, even in the raw food community, just going raw, I made so much progress with my health, had so many benefits, and was able to help my own family. So that's pretty much my story of healing. And my son, who had asthma, chronic ear infections, and allergies the first 3 years of his life, and I was very concerned and wondering why as vegans, my son was so sick. But I realized processed food, you know, we were basically living on pasta and bread. I don't think I had very much healthy nutrition in my diet. We did eat some vegetables, but they were highly cooked. And so it was kind of similar to my grandmother, what my son had. And in like 10 to 11 months, it was completely gone, dramatically and completely gone. And that's what led me to writing Creating Healthy Children, which was a 7-year project.
Yeah, well, that's terrific. I can definitely relate. I grew up with a lot of asthma and skin issues and allergies and swollen lymph nodes and all those things as well. And the dairy for me as well was by far the number one thing that made a big difference for that. So I'm just curious, I know you said that you were given a lot of antibiotics and Accutane, and I know those are really hard on our gut microbiome. Did you notice gut issues after getting some of those treatments?
Definitely. That was some of the earlier side effects. Was that my digestion wasn't good. My skin actually got worse, not better.
Yeah.
It dried out my skin, but it didn't take away. Like, I do know some people who said that it took it away, but then they would stop the Accutane or the other drugs and it would come back. And interesting, while my son was in college, that was the first time in his life that he went off being a vegan. And then towards the end of college, even went off of vegetarian. His friends, he perceived the need to fit in. And he ended up with dermatitis all over his face.
Wow.
And he even went to a dermatologist and they prescribed steroids. And he asked me to pay for it. And I told him, I'm sorry, but I'm not going to pay for that. I said, but you can do it, you know, but that's up to you. I'm not paying for that because I don't support that.
Yeah.
And he didn't want to pay for it. So he came home from college and he came back to vegan and raw food. And it took a while to heal. I mean, you know, he was drinking and eating all this stuff that he was foreign to his body. All these, I don't even want to call them foods.
Yeah.
That were foreign to his body for 4 years. And it took almost that amount of time to clear his skin.
Wow. Yeah. So what about with your parents? Did you see a significant difference in the health between your father and your mother who were living such different lifestyles or diets?
Definitely. My father was just always so energetic. He was like a major inspiration for me. And I would just watch him and just feel like his energy and his, you know, and the benefits that he was getting from healthy living. My mother, she had a lot of poor health symptoms. One of them being that her energy was low, that she had severe insomnia. And I also had insomnia for a while, even while I was vegan. But when I went to raw vegan, and especially when I followed certain healthy living practices that go along with being raw vegan, I no longer had problems anymore. Like even when I started eating earlier and not binging on junk food at night like I did even when I was vegan, my insomnia completely resolved in a very short period of time. And I regretted, you know, that I could have really helped my mom. She died very young. She was like about 57 years old. She had listened to a medical doctor who told her she would feel younger again if she got a hysterectomy. And for no real reason, she got a hysterectomy because he told her she would feel younger again.
Wow.
And so because she wasn't feeling well, she went and had this surgery, and my father said, why would you get a major operation for minor symptoms? You know, I mean, obviously she was really low in energy.
Yeah.
And she was having other issues as well with her digestion, but this all could have been changed with transitioning to a healthier lifestyle, but she just didn't realize it at the time. And so the operation, there were complications during the surgery, and it triggered a heart attack.
Oh, wow.
And a few months later, my mom passed away.
I'm sorry.
So I grew up with that, and I think that gave me even more motivation to do research on healthy living and to spend more time with my dad, talking with him about health and how he grew up. And that led me to doing a lot of my own research. And over time, as I was raising my kids, I realized how important it was to put this information out there. And I think I have the one book there are a couple other books also that have a little bit of information, but I think mine is the one book that's really packed with information for parents, all the way from preconception to pregnancy, to breastfeeding, to raising healthy toddlers and children, and also children who parents are trying to help them transition to being a healthy plant eater.
Yeah.
And then I even have a section on teenagers and young adults. I was pretty persuasive with my kids. I don't know if I really recommend doing it the way I did it. When I first started eating raw food, I was just so passionate that if I was in a supermarket and I saw somebody with animal products and white bread in their shopping cart, I would end up having an entire discussion about it and try to convince them that they need to stay in the produce section. And I got a lot of enemies.
Yeah.
And I did put a lot of pressure on my kids. I think setting a role model is the most important thing that parents can do for their children. And if I had to redo it, I think I would have set that role model with some boundaries. Like probably the major boundary would be like, we don't eat animal food. But other areas, like if we went out and my kids had some processed vegan food, I think it would have been okay. I think it's more about what you have in your home and what you're and the example that they're watching. We don't realize how powerful our example is as parents, educators, grandparents. We don't realize it. Aunts and uncles, we are such powerful motivators for our kids. Yeah. And I actually think it would have been even more powerful for me to relax more. And, you know, my kids went to parties every week. Every week they were invited to parties. They were both very popular kids, both in the schooled community and the unschooled homeschool community.
Oh, cool.
So, because I did end up homeschooling my kids.
Okay.
But they had always loads of friends. My daughter had a sweet 16 with 52 friends there, and they loved her. All those people loved her, all those kids. So it would have been best for me to just realize, okay, occasionally they're going to have something else. But I was, because of the situations that I had experienced growing up, and also the fact that my father was ridiculed as a vegetarian, it was very important for me, the moral and ethical reasons. And I wanted my kids to really understand that.
Yeah. Yeah, that makes sense. And What was it that got you so passionate about working with children and raising healthy children? What kind of got you into the line of work of speech and language pathologist and things like that?
Yeah, that's a great question that I have really never been asked. So as a speech and language pathologist, early on in my life, I was in programs for children who couldn't focus, who couldn't read. I had to always have resource teacher. My father stayed up with me until 2 o'clock in the morning, studying with me because I couldn't focus. And meanwhile, he knew why. And I was eating all these foods that were harming me. They had MSG in them. You know, I grew up in the 50s and 60s when processed foods began. And so it was so exciting for everyone to have all this packaged stuff. And a lot of the packaged things that people were eating were loaded and still are loaded with monosodium glutamate in hidden labeling.
Right.
So there's a lot of ingredients in those packaged products, such as even things you would think are healthy, like hydrolyzed vegetable protein.
Yeah.
My mother probably thought because it had the word vegetable in it that it was good, if she ever looked at ingredients at all. I'm not sure.
Yeah.
But that's, you know, I grew up on a lot of that. I grew up on a lot of animal food. And I could not think. I could not concentrate. I still even remember those days. And how I would sit there in my classes, I would kind of like numb out.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of students do that.
Mm-hmm.
It's very hard to concentrate. And we have a very, very high population growing exponentially today of attention deficit disorder, hyperactivity, Asperger's, which is high functioning autism. And I believe, because I've worked with a lot of these families with kids who have these issues, these neurological issues, which really stem from what they're eating. A lot of it stems from what they're eating. So it's nutrition, it's lifestyle factors. There's a lot that goes into it.
Sure.
And years later, when I went to raw food in 1994, I had brain fog even as a vegan. So I still had a lot of that issue with thinking and concentrating. And sometimes people would ask me a question and I was so zoned out, I sometimes couldn't focus.
Yeah.
And in 1994, just adding all this abundance of plant foods, suddenly I could focus on questions and listening. And I was able to focus, concentrate. It's really amazing. Mm-hmm. So that was one of the, getting back to your question, that is the predominant reason why I wanted to focus on children, because I remember myself in those early years. I remember other kids like myself who could have had a much better life. And I started with speech pathology because I thought I could help children to connect through their communication, to become more engaged, to make eye contact, and to have better relationships with their families, to be able to play. I saw a lot of kids who couldn't play, who played parallel to other kids. Now, also understand that 40 years ago, when I started as a speech pathologist, autism was 1 in 10,000 children.
Right.
Autism almost didn't exist. I hardly ever saw a child with autism. Today, in my state of New Jersey, which is like the highest in the United States, autism is 1 in 32. And the expectancy is that by 2032, autism will be 1 in 2 children.
Yeah,
Dr. David Martin just wrote an article on that we will have no national defense by the 2030s because of this.
that's terrifying. And almost just as terrifying is the question of why this isn't being talked about more. You know, it's a little you know, concerning that more people aren't aware. I'm going to guess that most people don't know that in New Jersey, 1 in 32 children are experiencing autism. And I assume that it's similar around at least the United States. And so, you know, can you explain to people what is autism, you know, and what does that look like?
So the one thing that I really do want to point out here is that autism is extremely individual, right? There's a wide gamut of autism spectrum disorder. There are some people at the very high functioning end, and they really want to celebrate autism because they believe it's part of who they are. And someone with autism can be absolutely brilliant. I have seen lower functioning autism with a lot of cognitive dysfunction, but I've also worked with people who are at the very high end, and they are absolutely brilliant cognitively. And a lot of times, even though the left hemisphere of their brain is having difficulty with language, speech, and communication, and they might not be engaged, also behaviors from the frustration of not being able to communicate, many of them are brilliant. I mean, that's the best word I can use, brilliant. And we've heard of this, brilliant in the areas that are on more the right side of the brain, the spatial area, music and math, and even computer skills. So, so some people take offense to words like heal and reverse because they don't want to heal it and reverse it. They have taken it into their life, and they even call it celebrating autism. However, I also have worked for 20 years as a speech and language pathologist in the school system, primarily with an autism continuum. And I've worked with the whole array of students, but I've worked predominantly with students who were very low functioning. And it is so frustrating. And there are things that can be done to help them. And the families are absolutely devastated, and the parents are not celebrating autism. And so it's my goal to be able to help them to improve. And some children able to turn around. I think the prognosis is even better when a child is young. But there have been parents who believe that going to a healthy, whole, fresh plant way of eating is the way to go. And upon reading research and understanding the benefits, they're willing and motivated to go there, and they hold themselves accountable. And I have seen tremendous progress in some of the people, some of the families and children on the autism spectrum who have come to this lifestyle highly motivated, to the point where one family, the mom had called me. We had a Zoom conference, and she told me that her son had made so much progress that they decided to move to another area. And he was not labeled. He was mainstreamed in school. No one knew that he was on the autism spectrum. And this is years ago now. This is about 4 or 5 years ago. No one has ever questioned it. And he is living a completely normal life without the word autism attached. So that's not going to happen for everybody. And so I don't tell people that it's a perfect scenario as far as diet. However, it is so worth it, not only for mental health, but for physical health. And you can see that with some of the testimonials that I've received in my book, Heal and Prevent Autism, and the subtitle, Natural Solutions That Work. Because I am optimistic that even though for younger children, the prognosis is much better, I believe that for any age, that improvements can be made in terms of communication, behavior. I've had parents tell me that their child who was violent, and a lot of that is frustration. It's not that the child is truly a violent person.
Yeah.
It's frustration at lack of communication.
Right.
And once the child is able to communicate better, it changes their world. And so this parent said that her child is now calm. And so this is another really strong reason to think about coming to a whole, fresh plant way of living.
Yeah, definitely. And just with those few examples, you know, that is reason enough, I think, for, you know, a massive media campaign. Everybody should be promoting this. I know you said some people get offended because they've just taken on this identity of autism for their family members or for themselves, I suppose. But I mean, we all should be striving to, you know, give ourselves and our family and our communities the best health and lives and experiences that we can. And, you know, just switching to a raw plant food diet or just eating more fresh fruits and vegetables, you know, regardless if you have autism or don't have autism, the more fresh fruits and vegetables you eat, the better your experience can be in life, regardless of what you're doing. And so, I mean, it's just something, I'm so glad that you're out there sharing this message, and especially with the experience that you have behind you, it makes your message even that much more powerful. You know, families should be taking this message to heart and really testing it out and seeing how it goes. And I'm just so glad that you're out there showing people what's possible.
Yeah, I mean, I'm passionate about this. This book was really from the heart. And I also, a big part of me also relates to those people who want to celebrate it.
Mm-hmm.
And I feel that I do celebrate it. I even supervise at a camp for autism. It's a very unique camp program where I have been supervising graduate students in speech pathology for the past 7 years. The camp didn't happen this year because of the current situation, but all the other years I there supervising graduates in speech pathology as they worked in a children's program with kids on the autism spectrum. And the program is highly unusual because it's a family dynamic program where the entire family is there.
Mm-hmm.
And that made it really beautiful because it gave me an opportunity to also speak with the parents. And I have to say that parents who I spoke with who have already started to change diet and lifestyle, even if it's just going to gluten-free, dairy-free, mm-hmm. they're already noticing a difference, gluten-free, dairy-free.
Yeah.
So diet and lifestyle is a big deal. And we can celebrate autism while also focusing on the diet and lifestyle factors.
For sure. Would you say, I know that I've heard a lot out there in the mainstream narrative that autism is a genetic condition and that's what drives it. And I wonder if that is part of why people are resistant to taking on the accountability or the responsibility to try and do something about it. Do you find that to be the case?
You know, there could be a predisposition to it, but when you're talking about 1 in 32 children, this is no longer something that we can just call genetic.
Yeah.
There are many epigenetic factors that come into play here. We have so many more exposures than ever before. There's no way that autism can be rising. It's soaring. I mean, the fact that the expectancy of it to be 1 in 2 children is quite alarming, and that we definitely need to take notice of this. So no, I do not believe at this point, from all that I know, the research that I've done, the research that I've been reading for years, I do not believe that this is solely genetic. I do believe that for some children, there is a genetic predisposition, but I think we're way, way beyond that at this point.
Right.
And I think there's a lot of environmental, dietary, and lifestyle factors now involved. And through the processed foods, through glyphosate, which is Roundup fertilizer used on foods, that's a big one. So if you're eating conventional foods and you're not eating organic, I'm not saying organic is perfect, because there are still some chemicals, organic chemicals, that are used on a lot of organic produce.
Yeah.
But it's still going to be miles ahead of conventional. So I would recommend staying away from conventional produce and the processed foods. We just don't know what we're putting into our kids' bodies. And a woman during pregnancy, that's when the brain is developing. You don't want to be eating all these processed packaged foods loaded with what I talked about earlier, monosodium glutamate. That's an excitotoxin.
Yeah.
It's a direct link to attention deficit and autism. So I know that there are all of these environmental factors. We also have to look at all of the environmental toxins in our surroundings. And I talk about all of them in my book, or as many as I can get in there. So you'll get a really good understanding of the poisons that we should be avoiding by taking a look at Heal and Prevent Autism.
Yeah.
And the good thing is that the whole second part of the book is natural solutions that work.
Yeah.
The first part of the book is the many, many causes that we can start to look at. And the second part of the book is natural solutions.
Yeah, I love that you split it into those two sections, and that you bring up the importance of understanding toxic load, because it's, that's bringing in all of the toxins from all different aspects of our lives. And it's not just the food, it's not just the environment, it's all of these things that, are accumulating and causing some issues. And a lot of these chemicals that we're exposed to are endocrine disruptors, and they cause inflammation. And so could you just talk a little bit about the role of inflammation and how that affects the gut and autism symptoms?
Yes. So one thing that I really always like to make clear is that the gut-brain connection is very, very clear. And when we are consistently harming our gut and creating bad bacteria in the gut, if the gut is overwhelmed with bad bacteria from foods that don't digest well, that do not contain fiber, okay, like animal food and processed food contains little to no fiber. If we're constantly taking in all those foods, and I want to say that 63 to 70% of mainstream diets, and it's not only the US diet anymore, it's like worldwide.
Yeah.
we went to Asia a few years ago, and traditional Asians used to eat rice and vegetables. Now it's like there's all these processed foods and restaurants and cafes just serving animal food and processed packaged stuff. So you're not getting healthy whole foods. And this is directly affecting the gut bacteria. And what happens when you take in too much protein and food toxins is that the intestinal wall slowly begins to thin out. And that causes leaky gut. And so these toxins start to enter the bloodstream. And that entering the bloodstream of all this toxins is what's causing this inflammation. And so we end up with inflammation that can lead to affecting numerous organs, and it does go directly to the brain and the nervous system. There's a direct connection, and many, many medical doctors are talking about this. I'm not the only one talking about this. It's out there. You know, if we don't listen to the news and we start looking at the medical journals, you are going to see the real research. And if you look at long-term studies on hundreds of thousands of people, you will see the difference between those who are living a whole plant food lifestyle loaded with fiber and those who are eating foods that have little to no fiber. And the long-term research is showing that the plant diets are anti-inflammatory, whereas the animal food-based diets are very inflammatory. So even diets that might be considered healthier, like keto and paleo, they're still loaded with animal food. And they do have some plant food. And one of the things that's good about those diets is that they take out the processed food. So that's beneficial. But still, they are low carbohydrate. And they are high in saturated fat and cholesterol. And that's where the long-term studies point out disease. And a lot of these long-term studies have hundreds of thousands of people. There was just a recent study that had 600,000 participants from Harvard Medical School and London, Oxford. And they are recommending a plant food lifestyle. They're even claiming that their study shows that those who have gone to a plant food lifestyle, that because of that reduced inflammation and increased immunity, that they are seeing a better COVID outcome. So I thought that was really interesting.
Yeah, that is good to know. So people might think, you know, gut health, they want to improve their gut health, they just take some probiotics. You know, can you explain, just reiterate the importance of plant foods versus just using, say, just a probiotic somebody might find at the store?
So most probiotics, they don't do anything by the time they get down into the gut. They just don't. Also, probiotics are usually grown on dairy or soy. Soy today is one of the top bio-engineered crops, genetically engineered crops. Somewhere around 90% of it, I've read, is GMO, genetically modified. And dairy, we already talked about dairy, how toxic that is. You know, they will back that up by saying that by the time that you receive it, that the dairy isn't actually in the probiotic, but it's used as the base. Yeah. I don't want dairy in anything that I use. Dairy is one of the most highly inflammatory, mucus forming foods that anybody can take into their body. So I would definitely stay away from that. But even if you're getting something that is clearly vegan, most of the time it does not have any positive effect. What does have an effect? What is a prebiotic is plant food. Whole plant food is prebiotic. And what does prebiotic mean? Prebiotic means that the fiber in that food creates good bacteria in the gut. So you are growing good bacteria just by what you eat. That's your probiotic.
Mm-hmm.
All right. Especially leafy greens are extremely prebiotic. So eat your leafy greens, eat your whole plant foods, and you won't have to worry about spending money on probiotics. And you will have good, healthy gut bacteria, which will help to grow a good immune defense system.
Terrific. Okay, so I'm curious, outside of dietary changes, why are things like physical touch, laughter, and even music, why are these things that you mention in your book, and how does that affect children with autism?
Because a big part of the healing process for anybody who has any inflammation in the body would be connection to nature, connection to grounding. Getting, and in a time when we're indoors most of the time and our kids are on the computer and the iPad, we need to realize that we are getting more and more away from nature. And there are many medical doctors out there, and I have researched this for years, and there's so much research out there on grounding. You know, if you look in the medical literature, you will see how important it is to be out in nature and to connect with the trees and the plants. Children, I purposely had my kids out hiking all the time and camping and being part of organizations where other people were encouraging that. Even as teenagers, my children went on vision quests out into the woods with instructors who were interested in connecting them with the environment. And through doing this, it promotes good gut health and also increases your good gut bacteria. Yeah. Being in nature, it's truly amazing. And same with the sunshine. We should not be avoiding the sun. We should definitely not be avoiding the sun. That's where we get the best ultraviolet rays for vitamin D. And we don't even know all of the nutrients that we get from the sun. There's a book called Embrace the Sun that came out that I highly recommend. It's a whole book about why we need sunshine.
Wow.
And I've quoted them. I've quoted the authors of that book in Heal and Prevent Autism because sunshine is so key. And so all of these factors, being outdoors, getting enough sun, having your kids connect to nature in whatever way possible, take off their shoes, have them walking barefoot. This is so important. We have to really get back to nature. We can't live these indoor lives. There are toxic chemicals much more inside homes than outdoors. Now, I do talk a lot in my book about personal care products and home situations and how you need to have your home, which is super important. But even if you have all those things in place, you still need to be outside a good part of the time.
Yeah.
So those are some of the factors. I don't know, was there something else in there that I missed? Because I did talk about the sunshine and the earth connection. Yeah,
no, you covered all that. You did mention, so even things like people's bedding, that can even be a contributing factor to, off-gassing chemicals and heavy metals and things like that. I don't think a lot of people are aware of those sorts of things. So is it a good idea to, for children, they should have organic clothing or organic or special sorts of mattresses, things like that?
I would recommend organic clothing, if you can, organic mattresses, or at least put an organic mattress topper on top of your mattress, organic sheets and pillowcases, so that the direct contact that your body is having is not loaded with chemicals, because we ingest those.
Yeah. Yeah. And we're
All
sleeping.
those toxins.
Yeah. We're sleeping a lot of, there's a lot of time spent in our beds, and
That's right.
That's when we're detoxing the most, and our body is trying to heal. And so if we're exposed to all these chemicals that are giving the body more to try and detox, then we're just kind of fighting an uphill battle if we're going through that. So yeah, I'm really glad you put that in there. What about, so for parents or expecting parents, people that are planning to have children, either they're pregnant now or they're planning to start a family in the near future, what are some things that you would recommend that they should be some of the top priorities that they're preparing?
One of the top priorities would be to think about having and planning for a natural childbirth. No, it's not 100% guaranteed. Something could go wrong, but the majority of births, if you're planning a natural birth, you can have it. I would highly recommend a home birth. It's going to be safer. You can find a good midwife, and you can plan to have somebody with you who knows what they're, who's, a lot of these midwives are very, very well trained. So that doesn't mean that a medical birth will never be needed. There are situations, but most midwives are trained in what to look for if a child is not going to be birthed naturally. Most of the people who want to have a natural childbirth can have a natural childbirth.
Terrific.
That's one thing. The other thing is to plan on breastfeeding. Breast milk is the most important factor for healthy babies, healthy skin, reducing inflammation. Breast milk is the best thing for babies. Cow milk is meant, or cow milk formula is meant to grow a calf into a 600 to 800 pound cow. So I don't recommend animal milk. Even a smaller animal, yes, a goat is a smaller animal, but the protein molecule is still 20% protein, whereas human mother's milk is 5 to 6% protein. And that's the right protein for human babies. It's only natural for a human baby to nurse from the mother, and to nurse until the baby is ready to wean, not when the parent is ready to wean, but when the baby, the child, is ready to wean. My best recommendations is to plan for a natural birth, to look for a midwife who is highly skilled and has good credentials, and then also to plan for breastfeeding. And there's so much out there, but I have a lot in my book, Creating Healthy Children. There's a big section on breastfeeding in here. And then after that, raising children on healthy, whole plant foods, And it all starts with what the mother is eating. And the child, even, I didn't realize this, but even between 9 and 18 months, that is one of the strongest periods of food imprinting on the brain. So a child of 9 to 18 months watching parents eating potato chips and junk food, they're going to think that's the food that they're going to eat. Whereas if you're eating whole, healthy plants, that's what the child has in the mind, imprinted on the brain, and that's what the child expects to be eating, even if the child doesn't have a full diet yet. And then, of course, starting the first foods should be fruit. Fruit is the easiest to digest of all of the plant foods. It is pre-digested during the ripening process. So fruit is ideal. A banana, a ripe banana, fully speckled, is 5 to 6% protein. And isn't that interesting?
Yeah.
That's exactly what I just said is the protein of human mother's milk, 5 to 6% protein. So ripe banana, ripe watery fruit is the perfect fruit to transition when baby starts to eat solid foods. And just during pregnancy, the woman following healthy principles, some of these things we have already talked about, staying away from chemicals as much as possible. Of course, you cannot always control what you breathe. When you go to another environment, you may not be able to control that. So it's even more important what you breathe inside your own home. So looking at your, the structure of your home, and, even something like paint. If you need to paint a room, you want to stay away from VOCs, volatile organic compounds. You don't want to be breathing all of these chemicals. You can get no VOC paint, no VOC. So that's just one thing, but there's many different chemicals you want to look at in your own living space and even in your outdoor environment, what you can change and what you can avoid. Even pools, chlorinated pools, maybe staying away from chlorine wouldn't be a bad idea. If you do have your own pool, you can look into, there's natural pools today that are, salt pools or other natural ingredients. I know a man in Florida who has a natural pool product that some of my friends in Florida, and I have some clients down there who I refer to him for their pool ingredients. So you can find it. There's plenty of people who are more holistic, vegan, and more conscious of chemicals today, more than when I was growing up in the 50s and the 60s. Everything was chemicals, and so we can have a non-toxic lifestyle if we're looking for that, and we can avoid a lot of the problems that infants, babies, and young children have today. Like I said, those normal childhood illnesses are not normal. You can have a healthy, happy, well-adjusted child. And I want to add one more thing to what a pregnant mom can start to think about is skin to skin contact. A lot of that skin to skin will come along with breastfeeding. But I recommend even more skin to skin, even when you're not breastfeeding. Those first hours, days, and weeks, I recommend mothers to hold babies against their skin as much as you possibly can, because that early skin to skin contact reduces the hormone cortisol, the stress hormone, and it increases oxytocin, the love hormone. And isn't that what we want for our babies? That love hormone to feel right in the world. Children who are held against the skin, they feel right in the world, and they grow up to be well-adjusted children. There's been some research showing that children who have more skin-to-skin contact, especially with the mother early on, but then later on even with the father, that early skin-to-skin leads to higher intelligence scores later on. So higher IQs because of earlier skin-to-skin. And we should always be giving our kids skin-to-skin. Yeah. My daughter is coming with my granddaughter tomorrow, and I'm looking forward to giving them lots of skin to skin. So this is something that we can encourage in pregnant women and really everybody, because skin to skin creates happy, healthy, well-adjusted individuals. And that's what we want for our children. And it also increases brain development.
Yeah, that's incredible. A lot of really good information there that you just gave us. And, you know, what kept coming to my mind is just how sad it is that most of the mainstream narrative and the recommendations that are put out there, I mean, especially during the last couple of years where children are being separated, you know, parents are told to stay, you know, keep distance from their children. And I know children that are being born are not getting that skin to skin contact because of all of these interesting recommendations that are being given. And just, you know, even before that, you know, there's just been so much what I would call misinformation about the importance of, you know, say skin to skin, say breastfeeding, formulas, you know, all these different things. It seems that we're getting the opposite message of what is just seems to be more common sense, but nobody is really putting together the dots, you know, and that is exactly why I love both of your books, your Creating Healthy Children book and your new book here. You know, this is pivotal information that people need to understand and just be reminded of, that the way that we are raising our children, the way that we are living our lives is so unnatural and so toxic. And you know, like you said, you grew up in the 50s where everything was chemicals, you know, and ever since World War II, you know, we've just had this explosion of chemicals, and look at how our health through all ages has gone down. It's just decreased, and we've gotten sicker, and it's just, you know, we have to wake up that, you know, the way that we're living these days, the chemicals that we're surrounded by, the physical activity that we don't, you know, take part in, and, you know, all these different things, you know, it's just so important that people start getting this information that you're putting out there to turn their lives around. And so, yeah.
I totally feel that way too. And I see it all the time. It's the more unnatural we live, the more unnaturally that we live, the more illness we are seeing.
Yeah.
And that's why today, I mean, cancer is 1 in 2 risk for men and 1 in 3 risk for women.
Mm-hmm.
Even when I was growing up, when all of these chemicals and processed foods began, I didn't see young people in their 20s with cancer.
Right.
It would be an old person with cancer. But now it's younger and younger. We're seeing children with leukemia.
Yeah.
It's because we're living in unnatural. And that's really what books are about, how to go back to our natural roots.
Yeah.
And how to go back to where we came from originally. Mm-hmm. And where we originally came from, we were living healthfully. We weren't exposed to all these chemicals. We were eating natural plant foods. That's what we were eating.
Yeah. Yeah, and something that also came to my mind as you were speaking about, you know, being exposed, pregnant mothers being exposed to chemicals and their, you know, personal care products. I would just recommend, after people read your 2 books, I would recommend also looking up the book Our Stolen Future. That's a book. I'm not sure if you've read it, but it talks a lot about the chemicals that we're exposed to, the pesticides, and how important it is, how big of an impact it can have on a child's developing brain, depending on when the mother comes in contact with that chemical when she's pregnant. And so, you know, the chemicals that they're spraying in our yards, on our food, in our parks, you know, all these chemicals are just really, really dangerous. And so, you know,
And I don't think, and most people don't realize it. That's the thing. So
yeah,
if anybody is watching this and is really surprised because you have not been exposed, because you know, the news today, they're not talking about health.
right.
There is no mention of healthy living. So if you're watching the news and this is the first time that you're hearing about exposures, toxic exposures, this is what we need to look into. We can have healthy lives, even today when we don't think we can lead healthy lives anymore. We can. We can lead healthy lives. We can build a strong immune system in ourselves and in our children. And it's all about what we are taking into our bodies.
Mhm.
And in all areas, not only through what you're eating, but through what you're breathing in and also what you're thinking. So if you're thinking that everything is scary and you can't even connect with anybody, you can't touch anybody, then that's pretty toxic thinking.
Mm-hmm.
And so the mind is also something that we want to remain healthy, open, conscious, and focusing on natural solutions.
For sure. So my last question is for those families and those parents that have autistic children or a child somewhere on the spectrum. What would you say? And I know you've given a lot of great tips already and information, but what would you say are some of the most important things that they can start doing today, or you know, in the near future, to start making a big difference?
So I would say for anyone with a child or an adult with autism who is wanting to make changes that will be really helpful for them, no matter what the level of autism, because I already said earlier on that each person is extremely unique. And I do respect that. I do respect that uniqueness. But I also know from children and adults, because I know adults who have made improvements, even as adults. So no matter where you are, if you start moving to a whole plant lifestyle and getting in a lot of those fresh fruits and veggies, and it, you know, a lot of times it's overwhelming to people because they're like, oh my goodness, what about protein? What about, I'm not satisfied. What am I going to do to feel satiated? There's so much, there's so many fun things that you can prepare that are so much easier to digest, that will just, you know, give you energy, improve your lifestyle. And you just have to start researching, go on YouTube. If you don't have my books, I think they loaded them in. Even if you start there by reading some of that information at superhealthychildren.com. And I have another website, feelfabulouswithfood.com. So the one, superhealthychildren.com, is more for children and families, but there will be information for everybody there as well. My books are on that website, Creating Healthy Children Through Attachment Parenting and Raw Foods. And the attachment parenting part, I talked a little bit about today in terms of skin to skin and breastfeeding and planning for a natural birth. And the raw food part is about eating natural whole plant foods. So there's a lot of detail in there. There's simple recipes in there. There's stories of families. There's an entire chapter on families striving for a healthy lifestyle, as well as questions that have come in from families. And so that book, Creating Healthy Children, has pretty much been a classic. It was published in 2010, but has been reprinted 3 times. And then Heal and Prevent Autism, Natural Solutions That Work, is also on my website, superhealthychildren.com. And I have a recipe book because many families who read Creating Healthy Children over the years, they wanted a book that was only recipes, that they could look at very simple whole food recipes that were not going to take them 3 days to prepare, like some raw food recipe books.
Yeah.
Have these really long, complicated recipes. I couldn't use those books. So I created a book for families, and the family on the cover is a family who has come to some of my classes. And the book is Raw Vegan Recipe Fun for Families. And so that's that book. And that's also at superhealthychildren.com. And they come in an ebook as well as a printed version, and easy just to get there, or on Amazon. So all 3 books are on Amazon. And those I think will be very helpful for people just beginning, who want to get as much information as possible, who want to start transitioning to easy recipes. And I think some of the recipes in that book will be, in the recipe book, will be extremely satiating. So yeah, that would be a good start for you. And just learning about raw food, there's a lot of good raw food information out there now on YouTube, on Instagram, on Facebook. And so I highly recommend just taking your time and starting to clear your cabinets. Look at what you have in your pantry, look at what you have in your refrigerator, and does it promote a healthy gut microbiome, which in turn leads to a healthy brain and neurological system.
Perfect. Wow. Thank you so much. I mean, this has been a very enlightening interview, and I know people are going to love this information. I have gone out and I got your new book on Kindle. We've already got your Creating Healthy Children's book. And, you know, I would just suggest that everybody go out there, you know, get the books, delve into the information, and check out Karen's resources. Go to her website, get on her newsletter, you know, just get yourself the right information you need to be, you know, healthy and have a healthy family. So,
Yeah.
Karen.
And I do have my newsletter on the homepage of superhealthychildren.com.
Perfect.
Free newsletter, and you get like a free little raw food, finger food ebook when you sign up for the newsletter.
Nice. All right. So yeah, I will put all the links in the description box down below, so everybody can go check out Karen's resources and get the books and all that. And yeah, is there just any, you know, any last message or words you want to share before we sign out here?
I just also wanted to say, for people who are interested in getting really deep with this, I am the director of a health coach certification course, which is called the Vegan Certification Course. And the primary focus is on raw food, but first and foremost, going to plant foods. And it goes really deep into a lot of different topics. It's four modules with Q&As and live coaching every week. So if anybody is interested in that, they can find me at feelfabulouswithfood.com. And I also want to say that for those who are in situations where you don't take your child out, where your child is not communicating and is frustrated and is having a lot of behaviors, just realize that improvements can be made at any age. And by starting to do this lifestyle work, that you will be helping your child on all levels, physically, mentally, emotionally, and spiritually as well. And I've seen it happen personally, and I highly recommend that you start and you not stress yourself out, but that you begin to incorporate these healthy lifestyle suggestions that Matt and I have given you today.
Beautiful. All right. Well, thank you, Karen, so much. Again, this was very enlightening. Great information that you're giving out for people, and I'm so appreciative of you. So thank you so much for your time. And everybody, again, the links to all of Karen's resources are going to be in the description box of this video. So go check those out, share this video, and thank you so much. Yes, you are so welcome. Thank you. And everybody else, we will see you in the next video. And until then, always follow your raw intuition.